One day before I went on my break last week, I brought up I made a prediction that Joe Biden, in the wake of the disaster in Afghanistan, was going to pivot to the Wu flu and back to vaccines and all this stuff, and stir up more of the vaccine slash mask culture war as a way to try and energize, his base, if you want to call it that, and to get people to move on from Afghanistan. And he's tried to do that, or I shouldn't say he. When I say he, I refer to like the composite Biden, as in the administration, has tried to pivot to the Wu flu and to demonizing unvaccinated people. We've got the CDC director out saying that folks who are not vaccinated should stay home for Labor Day weekend. It's too dangerous. You can't go outside. You should not be traveling. You should not be going to the beach. You should not be, barbecuing outside and making ribs. It's much too dangerous. And it's not getting a ton of play, at least from what I've seen. I mean, it seems to me that Afghanistan is still dominating the news, and we're getting more and more news about all this. Not only did, as I talked about yesterday, did Biden say, "Oh, I got those ISIS guys, those ISIS-K terrorists who are going to carry out more bombings in Kabul," after they blew up a couple, over 100 people last Thursday. Oh, and then it turns out those weren't actually terrorists. That was just a family, including 6 or 7 children. So we had that news really. I mean, it was news on Sunday, but really Monday, because that's Sunday everybody takes off. And so Monday the news was Biden massacres children, which was roughly the title of my video yesterday. And then today actually it was late yesterday in the afternoon, but I'm just talking about it today because, I'm kind of always discussing yesterday's stuff if I'm discussing things that are in the news. Normally, I try and discuss things that are not being talked about elsewhere. And Afghanistan was one of those things. For a long time, I was talking about Afghanistan. The media had not touched it in years. The media hadn't really talked about Afghanistan since Obama's surge way back in, what was that, like 2014 or something? And so now, just because everybody else is talking about Afghanistan, I don't feel like I should stop. There's a lot going on with Afghanistan. There has been for quite a while. There's been a lot to talk about. There's more to talk about now than there has been in quite a while, and I'm glad that everybody else has caught on to that. But in a way, that in and of itself is a very interesting story. Because no matter how many times the Biden administration keeps trying to pivot to the Wu flu and to, demonizing unvaccinated people, and even while there's a legal battle going on here in Florida between the great evil, anti-science Governor DeSantis, who is taking the side of the virus in the war on the Wu flu, even while that legal battle, between him and local school districts is going on, the media is still focusing mostly on Biden's handling of Afghanistan. And they really are not letting him go on this one. Reuters now, getting to what came out yesterday and what is a pretty interesting story. Reuters has a couple of leaked calls between the Biden administration and Ghani, mainly a call between Biden himself and President Ghani of Afghanistan, where Biden tells Ghani, "Hey, everybody thinks that you're losing. Everybody thinks the Taliban is going to take over," which is kind of funny because Biden publicly, and everybody, all the wizards of smart publicly have been saying the opposite. Well, nobody thought that the Taliban were going to take over. We all thought that this government we built up over 20 years was going to hold out just fine. Whereas Biden on the phone is telling Ghani, "Hey, we got a problem here. Everybody thinks that you're going to lose. Everybody thinks the Taliban is just waiting to take over the country. And that's a real problem. You need to change that perception." And Biden even admitted, he said, whether that's true or not, whether or not you're doing a good job in the war, whether or not you're winning or not, you need to make people think that you're winning. And, that to me, Biden telling Ghani to do that it makes Biden complicit in the deaths of any of these people who would have had a chance to get out over the past few months, out of the country before the Taliban took over and didn't, and now are going to be threatened by the Taliban now that the Taliban is in charge. My first reaction when this whole disaster and people rushing out of the country started, a few weeks ago, was why the hell are these people still in the country if they didn't want to be there under Taliban rule? Everyone has known for a long time that the Taliban was going to take over. So why are you still there if you didn't want to live under Taliban rule? And the answer seems to be because these people were tricked by folks like Joe Biden and Ashraf Ghani into thinking that Ghani's government was like a real thing that actually had power and, might do some stuff and control the territory. And Biden seemed somewhat aware, actually very aware, that that was not the case, and he wanted Ghani to lie. Whereas if you really cared about these people, you would accept the reality that, yeah, Ghani's government, the puppet regime that the U.S. had tried to prop up for 20 years, was totally a paper tiger and was going to fold instantly. If you really cared about the people on the ground, if you cared about the Americans in Afghanistan, if you cared about the poor saps who assisted the American occupiers for 20 years, you would do everything you can to alert those people, hey, you're going to be in a big danger. You need to get out now while you still can. You would want to promote the idea that the Taliban is winning. You would want to alert everyone to that fact. You wouldn't want to change the perception and to trick people into thinking that the Taliban isn't going to take over. And this call basically proves that Joe Biden has been lying when he says, well, nobody thought that the 300,000-man strong army was just going to fold overnight. We never expected that. Oh, who would have thought that? Well, apparently, according to Joe Biden himself, around the world, everybody thought that, except for Joe Biden. And so this, to me, makes him much more deserving of blame of what happened to these people. I've gone back and forth. People who listen to this channel know that. I'm torn on how much I want to blame him. Obviously, he deserves some blame for what's going on. But at the end of the day, I've said consistently, this was always going to be the conclusion to the Afghanistan story, or to the story of the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan. It was always going to end this way. But did it have to end in exactly this way? And the answer clearly is no. Joe Biden knew that things were going to be bad. He knew that the Taliban was winning, and he worked to try and trick people into thinking that the Taliban wasn't winning. He tricked people into staying who otherwise would not have stayed. People who could have gotten out and stayed because they were convinced erroneously by Ashraf Ghani acting as Biden's proxy that everything was going to be all right. And so there were a lot of people who had no idea, or who rather still clung to the belief that things were going to be okay until the very second that they saw the Taliban driving past their window and they realized, oh, the party's over. I was lied to. I need to get out of here right now. And so it's interesting that the media is leaking these things. This is obviously very unfavorable for Joe Biden. And it's hard for me to say that, the media is just doing all this because they're just that pro-war. Because the things that the media is reporting is not their narrative. Well, it's hard for me to say because I purposefully try to not follow media narratives. But the kinds of stuff, the stories that they're coming out with, do not generally lead you to the conclusion, gee, we should have stayed in Afghanistan for another 20 years. That's just not what I get out of this story. What I get out of this story is that this war, was doomed to fail, and our leaders lied to us about that, which we know from the Afghanistan papers that were published by the Washington Post, which is, a pretty pro-war newspaper. It's about the most pro-war newspaper. It is completely captured by spooks. And so I don't know what the media is doing here. It's not enough for me to just say they're all just so pro-war and that's why they're offended and that's why they're trying to make Biden look bad. Because they're not making war look good. They're making Biden look bad. I'll give you that. But they're not making war look good at all. I mean, you've got guys like Jake Tapper. Sure, Jake Tapper is a total, warmongering military-industrial complex hack. I guarantee you that his motivation behind this is that he wants more war. That is Jake Tapper's answer to this. But all these other guys, Reuters, when I read this Reuters story, it doesn't make me think, gee, we should have stayed in Afghanistan for a long time. I don't know how anybody could get that out of this. What I get out of this story is Biden lied, people died. And so all I can conclude is that the media is trying to take Biden out. I mean, these are, these kinds of stories are, would be included in the articles of impeachment. If this were a Republican president, certainly the guy would be getting impeached right now if this were Trump and, tapes like this were coming out. I mean, I guarantee you, even if the Afghan pullout went perfect, and Trump alerted people ahead of time and said, hey, get out while you still can. And he got everyone who wanted to leave out. And you didn't have scenes of people crying at the airport trying to get in and bombs going off. Trump would have been impeached just, for the fact that he got out of Afghanistan at all. But would they really do the same to Joe Biden? It's just, I find it hard to believe that they care that much about staying in Afghanistan, that they are willing to take him down over this. The only thing that I've been able to really try and pin this on is that the media might still have a desire for Kamala Harris to be president, because originally the only constituency that Kamala Harris ever carried was the media. It was the only interest group in the entire country that was interested in her. And so maybe they still do. Maybe the reason why, you haven't heard a thing about Kamala in weeks. She got one question on the situation in Afghanistan, and she totally bungled it, and they haven't asked her anything about it since. But Uncle Joe, they're just, they're putting him through the ringer. And they're not cutting him any slack. They're not running cover for him. They're not, moving on to other stories. They're not talking about how bad DeSantis is, because, of course, Biden, for the last few months, has been trying to use DeSantis as a foil. Say, oh, DeSantis is really irresponsible. He wants the virus to win. Joe, very responsible, wants the virus to lose. And they're not letting him have those wins. DeSantis has right now looks like he's on, he's at a low point, personally, because at this stage in the court battle, he is losing, although that was expected early on. I would be very surprised if DeSantis ends up losing once this makes it all the way to the Florida Supreme Court. I mean, that would be quite the shocker. But in the meantime, while he's losing in lower courts, the media could be, saying, oh my gosh, is this the end for DeSantis? Is he going to have to resign? His anti-mask, hysteria has finally come back to bite him. And Joe could be coming out and saying, oh, I think masks are good. And it could be a good story. It could be a good week for Joe in the media. But instead, it's not. It's a terrible week for him. And we just keep learning more and more about, the bad things that have been going on in Afghanistan. Oh, but don't worry. Mitch McConnell has already taken impeachment off the table. So impeachment is not going to be what's going to happen. What the media is trying to do is essentially force Biden into resigning. Although I don't know why he would resign if he's not under the threat of impeachment. So maybe Mitch McConnell sees what they're doing. Maybe I'm giving McConnell too much credit. But, McConnell's when it comes to politics, he's pretty smart. I don't think he's as good as Nancy Pelosi when it comes to this kind of, really dirty politics type of stuff. And obviously, personally, he's not a good politician, but I'm saying as far as a political actor, a political operative, I think that McConnell is pretty competent. Maybe he sees that the media is just trying to bait Congress into getting rid of Joe, pressuring him to resign through the threat of impeachment and installing Kamala Harris. But realistically, I don't see, as dumb as it sounds for McConnell to come out right out and say, well, we're taking impeachment off the table. We would never do that. As much as that kind of sounds dumb on its face, if you think about it, well, if you don't take impeachment off the table, that means that you're keeping, putting in Kamala Harris as president, sort of as a option, which is not an option. You don't want that to be an option. She would be terrible. She would be worse than Joe. And maybe that'd be a good thing for Republicans. I don't know. But just, if you put a gun to my head and you say, hey, would you get rid of Joe Biden and replace him with Kamala Harris? I would say hell no. And, besides, as long as Joe has not been punished, through having to resign, all of these bad stories, surrounding Afghanistan can be hung over his neck like an albatross. And even if he ends up not running for re-election, just like how, Gerald Ford couldn't escape the shadow of Nixon and Watergate, Kamala Harris, if she has to be the nominee in 2024, is not going to be able to escape the long shadow of the Biden administration. And so dragging this out, I would think, politically for Republicans, would be better. And so maybe that's part of the media's calculus. But you don't see Democrats in Congress moving against Joe. You see them staying pretty silent. The Democrats don't seem to be acting like, oh, gee, we better rip the Band-Aid off with this one. Biden's become a real liability for us. And so, maybe it's at times like this where the hive mind theory of the U.S. media just kind of breaks down and doesn't work that well. Maybe these are, maybe there are incentives and motivations within the media that I don't fully understand. And so I can't help but think that there's something I'm missing here. So with that said, I think I will keep trying to think about this and, again, ponder this. And hopefully I'll come to an answer eventually. So with that said, I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.